The burden of the crown is heavy tonight.
Sire, your people need you to be strong.
I know.
The air grows heavy. He watches us. We must not linger.
The palace smelled like burnt incense, roasted lamb, and ambition. King Solomon didn't notice. He was too busy noticing everything else. Servants scrambled like ants on spilled honey, silver trays crashed, slippers slipped, and a harp string snapped somewhere upstairs. He lit a cigarette, or at least he wanted to, but that would have been illegal and scandalous. So he clenched his jaw instead and surveyed the chaos with a look that could split marble. 700 wives, 300 concubines, and 100 plots tucked in the folds of silk. Today, new princesses arrived. Moabite, Sidonian, Egyptian. And somewhere in their perfumed heads, they were calculating exactly how fast they could turn his crown into a paperweight. Azariah bowed so low his nose nearly scraped the floor. "Your Majesty," he said, careful not to spill his coffee, because if there was one thing Azariah feared more than God, it was coffee stains on palace marble. "The princesses are ready to meet you. The envoys await." Solomon nodded. "Bring them in." "And Azariah." He paused, letting the weight of the world press down on the man's forehead. "Keep the chaos down to a dull roar. Will you? I'm trying to think here." Alone for a second, Solomon let his gaze drift across the women's quarters. Silk and shadows, whispers and smiles. Some calculating, some terrified, some amused. One Sidonian princess laughed softly, flicking her hair like it wasn't woven out of political leverage and centuries of negotiation. He made a mental note. "Laugh at your own risk." A young concubine dared to step forward. "My lord," she whispered, barely audible over the crashing trays and shouting maids. "How do you keep it all straight? How do you manage?" She faltered, eyes wide. "All of us." Solomon's lips quirked. "With difficulty," he said, voice low, eyes sharp. "And coffee." "Mostly difficulty." She blinked. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. She could feel it. The weight of hundreds of promises, alliances, and hearts, and the quiet terror of making a misstep. A commotion behind them drew his attention. A servant had tripped over a cat. A real cat, mind you, not a metaphorical one, and spilled a pitcher of water across the marble floor. Solomon's eyes flicked to the young girl. "See? Chaos," he said. "Every day, all day, and yet somehow—" He let his hand sweep across the hall. "This palace stays standing." The Moabite princess stepped forward, eyes sharp, chin lifted like she owned a kingdom she hadn't yet visited. "Your Majesty," she said, voice precise, "I have come to serve your house, and to ensure my people have a voice in your court." Solomon smiled thinly. "Voice, yes. Influence, maybe. But remember, princess, a king doesn't bend for charm alone. I measure hearts, gestures, and shadows. Some hearts I guide, some I protect, some I watch like a cat stalking a mouse, and some, well, I leave to God. He's better at the messy ones than I am." A ripple passed through the hall. Some women laughed softly, some bit their lips, some just stared. He noted each reaction, storing it in a mental ledger no one else would ever see. The Sidonian princess with streaks of silver in her hair leaned against a pillar, hands folded. "And the others?" she asked, voice flat. "The hundreds of wives and concubines you have. How do you not drown in them?" Solomon leaned on the railing, chin pressed to hand. "Drown?" he said. "I don't drown. I tread water. I swim. I sink sometimes, but only enough to see who floats and who doesn't." He remembered the Egyptian princess who had arrived years ago, defiant, young, and dangerous in the most polite way possible. "Do you rule with your heart or your head?" she had asked. At the time, he'd laughed, because how do you answer a question like that when you've got 1,000 hearts to balance and at least 3 kingdoms to worry about before lunch? A bell rang. Midday prayers. Somewhere, a harp string snapped again. He didn't flinch. He was King Solomon, master of kingdoms, master of hearts, master of chaos disguised as order. 700 wives, 300 concubines, 100 plots tucked in silk folds, and every day, he walked through them, threading his fingers through a labyrinth of ambition, fear, and desire. Azariah approached again. "Your Majesty, shall I bring the envoys forward?" Solomon straightened, the faintest smirk touching his lips. "Yes, and make it clear, alliances are built on respect, on understanding, and on the occasional well-placed threat. One wrong move, one misread glance, and someone ends up sleeping with the palace cats instead of in the guest chambers." A low murmur ran through the hall, not of fear, but of understanding. They understood, at least in part, the weight of 1,000 hearts resting on one man's shoulders. And as Solomon walked toward the entrance where envoys waited, he felt the familiar mix of dread, thrill, and exhaustion. "This is why I married 1,000 women," he thought, "not for love, not for vanity, but for Israel, for power, for survival. And maybe, just maybe, because I enjoy the chaos too much to stop." The palace corridors smelled of burnt incense, fresh paint, and something faintly rotten, probably a servant who'd ignored the morning cleaning. Solomon moved through it all like a conductor, every step measured, every glance catching betrayal, desire, or flattery before it could even be spoken. "Your Majesty," Azariah whispered, sidestepping a rolling basket of figs like a seasoned tightrope walker. "The Sidonian princess requests your counsel on trade and marital arrangements." Solomon's eyebrows shot up. Marital arrangements? He let the words hang, letting the absurdity sink in. "I haven't even had breakfast, Azariah, and you want me to negotiate hearts and kingdoms before the first lamb?" Azariah swallowed. "It is urgent, Your Majesty." Solomon sighed, rubbing his temples. "Very well, but tell her this. A king doesn't just give his heart away, even when it's already buried under 700 others. And if she questions it, remind her that I have eyes in my head, ears in my walls, and patience thinner than the thinnest silk she wears." The Sidonian princess met him in the solar-lit hall, her skirts brushing marble, eyes calculating. "Your Majesty," she said, voice soft, smooth, "a kingdom cannot survive on silk and gold alone. Hearts must be guided, loyalties secured." Solomon leaned casually against a pillar, though casual was relative. He was King Solomon, after all. Everything he did carried weight. "True," he said, voice low, "which is why I have 700 wives, 300 concubines, and one advisor who's smart enough to keep me from marrying anyone who'd poison me for a laugh." She smiled faintly. Clever girl. But she had to prove more than charm. "And do you manage them all? Your wives, your concubines? The hearts, the ambitions, the desires?" Solomon smirked. "Manage? I don't manage. I navigate. It's like a chessboard, only every piece can move on its own, and some will try to checkmate you when you're not looking. Some hearts are loyal, some ambitious, some dangerous. My job is to see them all before they see me." A faint laugh echoed behind her, and Solomon turned. One of the younger concubines, barely out of her teens, had dared to giggle at the remark. He caught her gaze. "You think this is a game?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. She swallowed. "Only if the king allows it," she whispered, almost audibly, testing him, testing herself. Solomon chuckled softly. "Smart, dangerous, interesting. Watch carefully, child," he said. "The palace has rules. Every action has consequences. Every glance has meaning. Every whisper can topple kingdoms or start them." The young girl bowed quickly, her cheeks pink. He let his eyes wander to the others. Women from Moab, Egypt, Sidon. Each one carrying a history, a kingdom, and a secret in her eyes. He had learned long ago that beauty was a weapon, and curiosity a trap. Desire could build alliances, or destroy them. From the far end of the hall, a quarrel broke out. Two concubines, both from neighboring kingdoms, argued over seating arrangements at the midday feast. One accused the other of stealing her favored spot. The other claimed seniority. Solomon moved toward them, glancing like a cat about to pounce. "Enough," he said, voice cutting, calm but sharp. The palace is not a theater for petty quarrels. One more word, and you both sleep in the stables tonight. And before either of you objects, yes, the stables are heated better than most homes in Jerusalem. They froze. He nodded once, satisfied. Tension eased. Chaos tempered by fear, respect, and sheer unpredictability. Azariah cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the Moabite princess requests an audience to discuss her place. Solomon's lips twitched. Place? She meant influence, control, position in the web of hearts that stretched across the palace. Very well. Bring her forward, he said. The Moabite princess entered, eyes wide, but sharp. Your Majesty, she said, voice steady despite her nerves. I wish only to serve, to ensure peace between our kingdoms. But I also seek clarity. My position, my responsibilities. Solomon nodded. Let me tell you something, he said, voice lowering. This palace is a map. Every room, every corridor, every courtyard, territory. Every woman here holds a corner of it. Some are allies, some are threats, some are shadows you cannot fully see. Your job is to understand your place without disturbing the balance. And if you upset it, the consequences can be instructive. Her gaze did not falter. Clever girl. Most would have wilted. I understand, Your Majesty, she said. He smiled faintly. Good. Understanding is the first step. Observation is the second. Loyalty the third. Desire is the fourth. But keep it hidden. Always hidden. A bell tolled from the temple. Midday prayers. Musicians struck strings. The palace seemed to breathe as one organism, and Solomon, in the center of it all, felt the familiar ache of command. 700 wives, 300 concubines, hundreds of servants, dozens of kingdoms, and yet he must balance them all. Azariah, he said, eyes narrowing, prepare the chambers for the feast, and check the wine. One spilled goblet, and I'll know which princess was careless. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty, Azariah replied, bowing low. Solomon moved toward the inner balcony, watching the women settle, whisper, and calculate. This is why I married 1,000 women, he thought. Not for pleasure, not for vanity, for survival, for Israel, and maybe for the chaos that keeps me awake at night, smiling and wondering which thread will snap first. He inhaled deeply, the scent of incense, roasted lamb, perfume, and tension filling his senses. The palace was alive, vibrant, dangerous, and entirely his to navigate. And today, like every day, he would do what he always did. Observe, calculate, protect, and survive, holding 1,000 hearts in his hands and hoping they didn't crush him first. Before we proceed into the palace drama, Azariah, or maybe it was Solomon imagining Azariah, could almost hear the narrator saying, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and ring the bell. You don't want to miss what comes next. Because this story, it's about power, betrayal, love, and 1,000 women all under one roof. Solomon didn't need to say it out loud. He didn't have time. But if he did, the palace itself would have obeyed. The women were already in motion, silk and whispers, plotting alliances no one could track unless they had eyes in every corner and ears in every wall. Which he did. He leaned over the balcony, looking down at the courtyard where children played under the watchful eyes of nurses and guards. 700 wives, 300 concubines, hundreds of servants, dozens of kingdoms in miniature form, and yet it all had to run like clockwork, or heads would roll metaphorically and perhaps literally. A soft voice pulled him back. Your Majesty? It was a Moabite princess, the one who had dared to meet his gaze without flinching. I want to understand. Why so many? Why you do this? He let a slow smile spread, amused at the audacity. Ah, he said, voice calm but carrying the weight of countless decisions. The why? That is easy and impossible all at once. Easy because it is about survival. Impossible because it is about managing hearts, kingdoms, and the whispers between them. She tilted her head. Survival. Yes, he said, letting the word settle like a stone in the hall. Israel does not exist in a vacuum. Kingdoms press in from all sides. Alliances crumble, enemies lurk, spies watch. Every marriage, every alliance, every woman here is a thread tying Israel to safety, to influence, to peace. Some think I marry for pleasure. Ha! I marry for survival. The young concubine who had dared to giggle earlier now peeked from behind a pillar. And the hearts? She asked. Yours? Theirs? Ours? Solomon chuckled softly, the sound like silk scraping marble. Theirs are mine to navigate. Mine to measure, guide, protect, and sometimes ignore. Love is messy. Desire is messy. Loyalty is messier than anything you can imagine. He moved down the balcony stairs, each step deliberate, echoing across the hall. He passed the Egyptian princess, who bowed low. Your Majesty, she said, voice cautious. Surely managing so many hearts is impossible. He stopped and looked at her directly. Impossible? Perhaps. Difficult? Certainly. But necessary. Every woman here represents a kingdom, a treaty, a promise, a thread that if broken can undo decades of planning. And yes, I must guide them, watch them, protect them, or face the consequences of negligence. A sudden crash from the kitchens. Another tray down, a maid squealing, made him sigh. Chaos, he muttered under his breath. Always chaos. The Sidonian princess, hair streaked with silver, came closer. And the politics? She asked. Surely it isn't just hearts and desire. There are kingdoms, threats. What if one of them plots? Solomon's eyes narrowed, a flash of humor and warning. Then we watch, we guide, we intervene when necessary, and sometimes we let the consequences teach the lesson. One misstep can topple a kingdom, or reveal who is loyal and who is a snake in silk robes. The Moabite princess took a hesitant step forward. And the children? Surely they complicate matters. Yes, he said, exhaling. Children complicate everything. Alliances, inheritance, loyalty, and the constant, relentless observation needed to prevent disaster. From the far end, a young concubine whispered to another, Do you think he sleeps at all? Solomon caught the words, and for a fraction of a second, a real human smile flickered across his face. Sleep, he muttered, is for the foolish. I watch, I learn, I survived. And when I sleep, it is for only a heartbeat before the palace reminds me that the web never rests. The hall grew quieter, the women observing him, weighing every word, every glance, every subtle expression. Some admired him, some feared him, some plotted quietly, weaving their influence into the palace like spiders spinning silk. He turned to Azariah. Prepare the council chambers. The envoys from Egypt and Sidon are waiting. Tell them a king marries not for vanity, not for desire, but because he must, because Israel must, because the threads that hold kingdoms together sometimes pass through women, hearts, and whispered promises. Azariah bowed, and Solomon's eyes drifted back to the Moabite princess. And you, he said softly, remember this. In a palace of 1,000 women, one must see all hearts, hear all whispers, and measure every step. Fail once, and the kingdom suffers. Fail twice, and history remembers the folly. The bell tolled from the temple. Midday prayers. The harp strings strummed somewhere above. Servants hurried. Wives whispered. Concubines calculated. And Solomon, in the center of it all, smiled faintly. This is why I married 1,000 women, he thought. Not for pleasure, not for vanity, but for survival, for Israel, for control, and yes, for the delicate, maddening, intoxicating chaos that reminds me I am alive. And somewhere in the palace, laughter, whispers, and plotting continued, weaving a tapestry of power, desire, and danger that only Solomon could navigate. The palace corridors hummed with life. Footsteps, whispers, laughter, and the occasional clash of silver plates. King Solomon moved through it like a man threading a needle in a hurricane. Every glance counted. Every whisper mattered. He stopped outside the women's quarters and let his eyes drift over the silk drapes and carved cedar doors. 700 wives, 300 concubines, and 1,000 reasons why this palace could collapse if he misstepped. He pushed the doors open. The smell of rosewater and incense hit him first. Then the women, standing or kneeling, some weaving, some embroidering, some staring at him like he was a god or a threat. Both really. "Your Majesty," one whispered, a young concubine from Sidon, "how do you keep us all in line? How do you know every heart, every secret?" Solomon's lips quirked. "By doing what you least expect," he said, stepping inside. "Observation, routine, ritual, fairness when it counts, discipline when it doesn't. I measure who seeks influence, who seeks affection, who seeks power, and I reward or correct accordingly." He moved among them, touching nothing, yet seeming to touch everything. A glance, a nod, a small comment, each one sent signals. Loyalty, caution, ambition, he could read it all. A whisper reached him from the Moabite princess. "Do not trust the silver-haired one." He noted it, filed it away, and kept walking. The women were not simply wives. They were ambassadors, allies, spies, mothers of heirs, holders of secrets. Some were loyal. Some would betray at the right moment. Each day Solomon organized who saw him, when, and how. The palace itself was a clockwork of schedules, prayers, duties, and feasts. Miss one bell, misread one gesture, and a ripple could destroy years of strategy. He stopped by the young Sidonian, crouched over her embroidery. "And you?" he asked. "Are you loyal, curious, ambitious, or dangerous?" She looked up, eyes wide but steady. "I serve my lord," she said. "Good," he said. "Serve wisely. The palace rewards service, but it punishes folly with subtle cruelty." Faint laugh echoed. One of the older wives, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, muttered under her breath, clearly testing boundaries. Solomon didn't flinch. He simply smiled thinly, letting her know he saw. "I know everything here," he thought. "Every plot, every longing, every whispered alliance. And I must." Later, he walked through the gardens. The children played, courtiers whispered, and far off, the harp strings plucked a nervous melody. 700 wives, 300 concubines, hundreds of servants, dozens of kingdoms, and he balanced them all with patience, cunning, and the occasional calculated risk. A sudden voice broke his thoughts. "My lord," said the Moabite princess, approaching quietly, "I see now why you married so many. It is not vanity. It is a kingdom held in hearts." Solomon nodded. "Exactly, a kingdom of hearts. And every heart must be managed. Loved, guided, disciplined, understood. Fail once, and someone suffers. Fail twice, and history judges you as a fool." The Sidonian princess added softly, "And do you ever rest?" He chuckled, the sound low and dry. "Rest? A king rests only in dreams. And even then, the palace whispers in his sleep." He returned to the hall for the evening feast. Candles flickered, casting shadows over carved walls. Music played. Laughter mingled with the low hum of conversation, and the air smelled of roasted lamb and roses. He watched the women, the children, the servants, the envoys, and smiled faintly. Each day he held 1,000 lives, 1,000 hearts, and hundreds of secrets. Each day he navigated the chaos, the ambition, the desire. Each day he survived. And that was the art. Survival through observation, patience, calculation, and occasional ruthlessness. Love was secondary. Loyalty was primary. And above all, the palace was a living organism, and he was its pulse, its eye, its ruler. He stood at the balcony, looking at the city lights flickering below Jerusalem. 700 wives, he whispered to himself, 300 concubines, and yet I still feel alone sometimes. A servant approached and bowed. "Your Majesty, the envoys await your final counsel." Solomon exhaled. "Bring them forward." Let them see a king who rules not by desire alone, but by necessity, wisdom, and observation. Let them see why Israel stands strong. He paused, then added softly, for himself more than anyone. And let them remember, managing 1,000 hearts is harder than conquering 1,000 enemies. The palace hummed around him, alive, dangerous, intoxicating. The women whispered, plotted, loved, feared, and survived. And Solomon, at the center of it all, smiled faintly. He had married 1,000 women, not for pleasure, not for vanity, but for survival, for Israel, and for the fragile, maddening, intoxicating chaos that reminded him he was alive. And as the candles flickered and the harp strings strummed, he almost, just for a heartbeat, allowed himself to imagine peace. If you want to know more hidden secrets from history, proceed deeper into the lives of kings, empires, and the tangled webs of power. Hit that subscribe button, like, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next story, because the truth is always stranger than fiction.